Good morning, everyone. We want to make this into an interactive session, so if you don't mind, if you're comfortable moving a bit more to the front, that would be really nice. It's really up to you, but it would be nice to have I think it would help to have a better conversation if people move a bit more, a bit closer. Right. There is one there. Great, thank you. You're already a fantastic audience. That's good to see that. Welcome everyone to this session. I'm Koen Vermeer. I'm a professor in History and Philosophy of Science, but I'm also the co-chair of the Global Young Academy. And this session is, well, you see the title, How Science Reinforces Democracy Through a More Realistic Picture of Human Nature. So that is what we will be talking about. And this session is organized by the JRC, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And this is part of its Enlightenment 2.0 research program. And I think the aim of this program is to rethink how scientific evidence can be used in policy making. Now this project is led by David Mayer, who is head of unit at the JRC. And he's also the real organizer of this panel. I'm only in a way a placeholder. I'm filling in, but I'm very happy to do that because I've also been part of that project that David has been leading. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Now, Enlightenment 2.0, the program is part of a number of European initiatives, recent initiatives, rethinking science advice and evidence-informed policy making. There has been recently a report by SAPEA. There has been a report by the chief scientists of the European Commission. But also Finland has been just launching a new report. And Eva Hellström, one of the authors, is also one of our panelists here today. So welcome, Eva. It's great to have you here. And I think we will be talking a little bit also about what is in that report. It really fits into the topic of this session. But with this session, we also want to go beyond the European perspective, and so I'm very happy to have also global panelists. In a way, they're global, also because they're members of the Global Young Academy or alumni of the Global Young Academy, and so I'm very happy to see them on the panel. Soji Komai, who is a professor at the Nara Institute for Science and Technology in Japan, and Connie Shemerewe, who is a fellow co-chair of the Global Young Academy and based in Uganda. So I'm very happy to see all of you here for our discussion today. The discussion, as I said, will be interactive. It will be slightly unorthodox because we're going to turn around the normal order of discussion. And so the point is that after my short introduction of the theme, actually we will give the floor to the public instead of to the panel. And so we will give you the opportunity from the start to ask questions, to give comments on the topic. And so I will ask you, but also the panelists, 2 questions. You can think about that, you can interact, and then we will start a discussion. And then we will see where that takes us, basically, right? So, the panel in general is about evidence-informed policy making. But more specifically, it is about how the science of human nature can strengthen democracy, right? That is really in the title of this session. And I think it's aptly part of the Enlightenment 2.0 project because in a sense this whole idea and this whole problem started with the Enlightenment with the development of modern science and also kind of really stressing the role of rationality in science, but also in policy. And also modern democracies, in a way, developed in part as a kind of a component of this Enlightenment movement. And that also means that really, as part of this idea of democracy, is the idea of a rational individual. And I think this is basically the thing that we're thinking about, that we're questioning with this panel, but also with the project that David has been leading. And this idea of a rational individual is still very prominent today when we think about democracy and science. For instance, when we talk about fake news, when we talk about alternative facts, we think about fact checkers. We think about how to correct these falsities. But there is an assumption there that if the individual knows the truth, if they know the real news, then they can make good decisions, right? So that again brings in the idea that there is a rational individual that can make good decisions if only he were to be well informed about everything. And in a sense, that is also at the basis of democracy, this idea. It's similar with the wicked problems that we're talking about, where these are problems that are complex, these are problems that can be interpreted in many ways, but the problem still seems to be with the problem, so to speak, and we can also turn that around and think, well, maybe the wickedness is less in the problems, but maybe more in us who think about these problems, right? But this is not totally new, of course, these insights, and exactly these things were already debated during the Enlightenment, and at the time there was big questions and big debate about what kind of democracy would be the best democracy. One of them would be a direct democracy, for instance, which was really something that a few radical Enlightenment thinkers were putting forward. And that is the kind of idea we still see today with referenda, and we also see sometimes where that can take us. And that is based on the idea of a will of the people, and also the idea of a rationality of the people, right? That can make good decisions if we just give them this power and this collective power. There is also democracy as a representative democracy, which is a different model, again, developed during the Enlightenment by people like Diderot and others, where you choose people, and again there is an idea of a rational choice, but you use people that then can act rationally for you, that can make rational choices for you. So there is also part of that rationality. And then of course there is a question that we have to pose, I think, again, given the theme of the panel. Well, what then is the rationality not only of the people, so to speak, but the rationality of the policymakers, and how can we strengthen that rationality to make better decisions in democracy? But the third, and actually the preferred model of the Enlightenment, was enlightened absolutism, which is farther removed from democracy, but Voltaire and like the majority of Enlightenment thinkers actually preferred that there was a very small elite that they thought, well, they can make rational decisions, and it's much less clear that the people, so to speak, and that they also talked in these terms, could make rational decisions. So again, there is a lot of assumptions in the way we structure our societies about how humans behave and how rational humans are, and how rational they can make decisions in a democracy. At the time already, actually this was the time when the science of human nature started, but it's very interesting to see how that has developed over time. And so now I think this project is actually a reopening of this question, and thinking about the science of human nature now with behavioral sciences, psychology, social sciences. What lessons can we draw from what the science of human nature tells us today? And there's lots of interesting new insights and examples. Nudging, for instance, it's one new technique that people have been developing in the last decades, and that then gives an interesting new spin on also democracy, one could say, because it's an interesting combination of the idea that there is some kind of an enlightened elite that knows what is best, but also some kind of a direct choice by all the individuals. So it's a combination of these previous models in a way that you can see. And similarly, in a time where trust in government is decreasing, the appeal of direct democracy, of giving the individuals more choice, more power over the choices, is increasing. And new technologies potentially allow for these, for that possibility that individuals have a more direct voice in decisions. And that is really part of the new digital revolution, big data, and so forth. But again, there's lots of assumptions about human nature here and how that could work. And again, the science of human nature can help us here maybe to rethink some of these issues. And I think some of these issues are also ethical, and that brings us to the theme of the conference, of the World Science Forum itself, science, ethics, and responsibility. What is the role of science here in kind of supporting democracy? Does it need to protect the people also from the dangers of these new technologies? Like, well, we know all the issues about big data and privacy, but then again, people, well, with myself included, with a smartphone, you easily give away your data, even if there is, for instance, European regulations for data protection. You actually, that sometimes is more like an obstacle to quickly get your gratification on social media and all this kind of instant information that you're craving for. So would that also mean that we actually have to protect people from themselves? And I think that is also part of this idea of a science of human nature, better understanding how humans work, their emotions, their desires, their biases. But the question is in the end also a question of ethics and responsibility. To what extent can we intervene, and how should we intervene to create a better society? So with that, I think I kind of introduced some of the issues that are at stake, and I think it is relevant to think of this idea of a science of human nature really in terms of the big theme of the conference, science and ethics and responsibility. And so now I would like to really go to the interactive part of this session. And I would like to ask you 2 questions. These questions have been kind of co-developed already in some kind of collective intelligence by the panelists. And so we would like now to draw on your collective intelligence to move us forward in this debate. So we really very much hope for your input here. And so the first question is, what is the role of facts and reason in today's complex political and information environment? Right. So that is the first question, the role of facts and reason in this current day complex environment, political and information environment. And then the second question is, what should governments and scientists do about this? So that is also, it's a practical question, it's a political question, but it's also, of course, an ethical question, if you want. So these are the 2 questions that we have here on the table. Take a few seconds to think about it. And then it's really up to you, and you can shape this session by your comments and ideas and questions. And feel free, I mean, it can be a comment, it can be questions to specific people, even if you don't yet know very much about them. It can be questions to the whole group, or it can be questions to even colleagues in the room. Okay, we have the first hands that are being raised. That is perfect. So let's start with you.
Thank you. I'm Matthew DeFranco from the Marie Curie Alumni Association. And I really appreciate the topic. We have an event coming up called Research in Democracy, so it's perfect. One thing I wanted to ask really quickly is you framed democracy in the context of rational individuals, which I would actually question why. Not that I disagree, but my understanding is democracy is simply rule by the will of the people, or rule by people, and why rationale or rationality actually enters into that, and because I think there's a lot of examples where people can take control and vote and rule, and it's hard to define or to say whether they're being rational or not, because it's their own interests that they're voting for. And you made the example of Brexit. I think you were alluding to Brexit. That's an interesting example, because there's a lot of questions about what is rational, and the context is important. Just regarding the question, the role of facts in politics, I think, to me, the answer is it plays an enormous role, facts and reason today, because of the enormous amount of data and information that we collectively have access to. And governments and people in general are overwhelmed by data. And I can't give you an answer of what governments and scientists should do with this information, other than to say it is probably it's putting a strain on society and governments, because we're flooded with it. But yeah.
Martin Dominic from University of St Andrews in Scotland. We're talking about facts and reason. I wonder, how do we actually overcome the issue that, if you look at a democratic process, we see that people tend to fall for comforting lies rather than inconvenient truths.
Thank you. It was interesting to me that you finished off saying to create a better society. And one of the questions is, what is a better society? Because the definition of a better society is very... sorry, I'm Ishkhar Mizrahi from the University of Pretoria. Connie's telling me I have to say my name. The definition of a better society varies between different societies. If we can agree, and I'm not sure if we can, that the best society is the one where its citizens have the best life experience, are we happy defining that? So it's not just... maybe we can debate that as well, because maybe some societies, the best societies, where citizens are law-abiding, productive, and healthy. And some societies is where the people have a good experience from the time they wake up to the time they fall asleep. If that's true, if we're interested in the human experience and us having a good quality of life in our minds and experiencing a good life, then governments and scientists, I would argue, should use evidence-based policy to make decisions that increase happiness, or increase quality of life, or increase user experience for society members, because there's evidence on then. The regulations could be to limit and curtail or to promote something, but that's what it would be the goal towards. Just a broad statement.
So that opens up a whole theme of values also that are important here to think about.
And to continue along those lines, sorry, Stefan Bergmans from Euroscience as well as Elsevier. And to continue along those lines, you are questioning us about facts and about how rational we are, which, by the way, I don't think we are. So that's pretty clear to me. But one thing in here that you're not questioning is democracy. And I understand GRC is organizing this, and I personally was born and raised in social democracy. I've taken it for granted. And yet today, it's being challenged. And if you think you're a historian, I mean, democracy is like a blip in the whole of history. So is it meant to stay, or should we actually start considering other systems? I wish not, personally, but I think that as scientists, that is a question we need to ask.
I think it's a good question. I tried to open it up also in that way by mentioning enlightened absolutism, for instance. But I think we need to see where that leads. Yeah.
Murat Kunes, board member of Marie Curie Alumni Association. As Matthew mentioned, we are also considering research and democracy. I would like to ask one thing, maybe also comment and supporting the previous question or comment, that the human being was hunter-gatherers and then agricultural revolutions, like some from little tribes to the little societies, civilizations, and then emperors. And then now we are talking about democracy, and in the long history, democracy takes like little part. So maybe, I mean, why we are of course focusing on democracy, giving the power to the people, but how people really powerful on the management when the comes the reality. The thing is that maybe we need to consider not just like democracy, maybe the better system, because it's evolving. And in the near future, but the human nature is actually really good for democracy, or democracy is really satisfies the human needs, because people also were very happy in emperor time, right? And then now in democracy, because we don't know at that time, we didn't live at that time. So thank you.
Good morning. Name is Ali Sami from UK. I think going back to the original question about facts and what should scientists do about it, the truth, or at least the way it comes across, is that facts and reality are being challenged by untruths. And scientists lack the moral authority in this challenge. They cannot win against populism. And as a result, the society is left almost unprotected, because science has supposedly the truth and the good intentions. Those who are playing with untruths and political gains they have in mind present what suits them or their tribe or where they come from. And what essentially is lacking is a trustworthy moral authority for scientists in order to be accepted as an independent and, if you like, trustworthy source of information by the society. I think that is where science needs to focus. We have lost it so far. Global warming is the best example of it, that these realities are being challenged by those we know where they come from and what interests they portray. But we are absolutely helpless in convincing the society where the truth lies. That's our challenge.
Thank you. So there's a number of themes emerging about, I take the point about moral authority of scientists. I think that's very important. I think there is a whole theme about what kind of society do we want and the role of democracy, and also a theme about, I think, rationality and whether that's even the right way to frame this whole debate. I think there's many more questions, so please go ahead. And I think the man in the back there was first, and then maybe to Linda and to you.
Thank you. Gordon Ravančić from Croatian Institute of History from Zagreb, Croatia. Obviously I'm historian too. I would like just to add to some of these questions and to add a notion of responsibility in this discussion, because we have democracy and some people here questioned the reasons why democracy is the best system or it's not, whatever. And there was on the general panel, there was a question about, I believe the term was post-truth. Yeah? So the question is, as far as I can see, of course, it's related to all stakeholders regarding society and science and policy-making people. But to say that scientists or historians or only politicians or people in general are solely they are responsible, that's a question. Really, we should in all our actions, we should think about responsibility of our decisions and to take that into consideration. So before we start to do anything, to think or to try to think what can be done with that with the final result. So that's the just like way I'm thinking about it. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Linda Nordling. I'm a science journalist. I would like to, I mean, I'm not a historian, and there's many historians in here, and I'm kind of with some of the issues, but does science reinforce democracy? You could argue that science is being used as a tool in some democratic countries to divide people, and I think America at the moment is very interesting, you know. And then if science gives us a more realistic picture of human nature by understanding how people work, you will still have half a population that doesn't accept the premise and doesn't then maybe take it on. So I would challenge that science reinforces democracy. Obviously, we're talking about science, you know, but if we're talking about scientific evidence, it is certainly being used in some political situations to divide people. So that was my non-historian input.
Thank you very much. I'm also not a philosopher or I'm not even a scientist. My name is Bill Gillett, and I work for the European ESAC, the Academy's Advisory Council, and we're struggling with these questions as well a bit. I've been trying to ask myself, how have we evolved to this position? Did my grandparents just accept orders when they were told to go and shoot our German neighbours? I don't quite understand. I was told the world is my oyster. What I have to do is go out and get a job and it'll all be fine. And I have to say we've had a wonderful few decades. Everything's gone fine. And now we're beginning to hit the buffers because particularly on the climate, the world isn't my oyster anymore. I can't do what I want to do. And who has the courage to tell me that? And so I'm sort of thinking that the populists don't want to be unpopular, so they're not going to tell me that the world is no longer my oyster. And so somehow the scientists are getting the blame for actually saying, sorry guys, you can't go on anymore like this. Things have to change. And I'm wondering if that's one of the responsibilities that we have to somehow find a way of presenting this very difficult message.
Thank you. One more question, which I've asked you, Kuhn, but I would be keen to hear others on this. Is there a parallel between how democracy is being challenged today, in the facts, etc., in the establishment by populists, and what is happening even within science, where open science, in a way, could be seen as challenging the establishment itself within science? I find it really interesting that the two are happening in parallel and seem to be separate, and yet it is happening exactly at the same time, and it's the same consequence in a sense that are hoped. It's almost going back to the good old ways.
My name is Ari Motor. I'm the professor, National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies Japan, as well as the principal fellow at JST. Anyways, I have two questions, and the interest is one is Japan is very unique history of modernization. 150 years ago, Japan opened to the world. Then the directly science community and the government imported democratic systems and the scientific systems. But since then, the Japan government and the science community and the general public, facing difficulties, a mixture of the modern how to say, the Western style, the democracy, and the Western style, the science, values, and the scientific method. But the traditional, we are solid traditional religions and the traditional culture and the educations. Now the Japan is facing the difficulties. How to reshape their futures, next generations, Japan's scientific activities and integrities. One is the important point. Another one is I deeply involved in these 4 years, the SDI for SDGs, United Nations, the expanding. How to make the values, not only the global values, the SDGs suggested the 17 goals, but also the global platform is declared, not only the global discussion, but also we need pay attention to the local SDGs, local Tokyo and the local these cities, but the local cities and the local human habitat, the different cultures, different political systems, how to make the local SDG values for the future generation. Probably 2 years ago, I heard from the David Mayer's presentation in Toulouse. Since that time, this is a very, very interesting and also the important project and enterprise. We need expand those activities are taking place and opportunities all over the world. Different cultures, they have their different political systems and then different science systems. My question and interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Arimoto, for bringing in the global perspective here. I think that is crucial, especially in this kind of meeting today. Thank you. So we also actually have some people here, right? I almost forgot about you. So maybe it is time to listen to a few of the things that you have to say on these topics. Eva, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. Let's see. Okay, let's see if it's, I guess I need to do something here. Okay, sure, thanks. Just getting my 20 slides filled with graphs and bullet points. Okay, so the question of rationality and whether the human species is as a rational species is threatened or a thriving species is a very relevant question today. But first of all, wonderful engagement. Thank you for all the questions. And so I guess you're all expecting me to answer them all. I'll try to tackle a few of them and leave some room for the other panelists as well.
Do you want a microphone? Or?
Can you hear me?
Yes, it's fine. Okay.
Okay, great. First of all, I think that the world of knowledge and policy making and having science advice and policy making, it really requires some new thought and coming together from different worlds and different perspectives. And what we really need is to put our collective intelligence to work and engage in joint sense making of the world that we're living in today. From that perspective, I think that's one reason why we're here today, and I really thank for the opportunity to participate in this discussion and trying to make sense of this all together with all of you. From the questions, there were many questions that addressed the issue of democracy from the point of view of whether what's the relationship between democracy and rationality, rational individuals, and what is a so-called better society, and what is the role of democracy in versus social science, and whether actually science reinforces democracy or not. So there are a lot of challenging questions, and what I think is important that we do not just think about democracy, but the broader picture of really looking into what is good decision making in today's world and in different societies. So that's the key question: what is good decision making? And also having a broader perspective on democracy. Although we have different perspectives on democracy as a political system, we also have one widely shared agreement on a principle of leave no one behind, which is not that far from some of the democratic principles. So I think that we need good decision making where no one is left behind, and taking that as sort of a guiding star. So what is the role of facts and reasons in today's complex political and information environment? First of all, if we think about decision making and policy making in today's world, decision making has a lot of expectations. It's expected to give fast results, be cost effective, be open and transparent, offer opportunities for people to engage. It's important to understand what people are thinking. Decision makers are expected to have a long-term perspective, future orientation, be more strategic, overcome administrative silos, and be phenomenon-based, and also be evidence-informed. Just to tell you that the expectation of decision-making to be more evidence-informed is just one of the many expectations and relevant expectations placed on decision-making today. And the question is it possible to meet all these expectations at the same time? And if it is, how do we build bridges with the other expectations? What's happening in the information environment is that, as we've heard also here, we tend to talk a lot about the post-truth era, alternative facts, fake news, and so on. And to my ear, sometimes it seems a little bit a black and white discussion, because when we're in that discussion, we tend to forget that it's not only an issue of fake news versus scientific knowledge. There's a whole magnitude of other types of relevant knowledge in society. I rarely hear words like foresight, weak signal, experimental knowledge, tacit knowledge mentioned in these discussions. So there's a lot of different relevant other types of knowledge than science, and that is important to keep in mind and open up to all the different other knowledges. It doesn't mean that anything goes. So that I just want to make that clear. There's a distinction in that, and it has been also mentioned many times that the authority of science is threatened, and yes, but the question is not why is the authority of science threatened. Is actually the question is what do people today believe in? What do they trust in? And in today's world, many people trust increasingly in their own networks, and they trust peers. They don't necessarily trust always authorities. They trust their networks and peers, and that is something also for the scientific community to take into consideration. If you trust your networks and peers, it means that also the scientific community has to increasingly open up to society, open up to people, develop citizen science, which we've heard a lot about here, open up to these other sources, other types of knowledge, and engage in more sort of co-creation, co-productive activities with also other types of knowledge, and open up to decision makers. So what does it mean when you open up to decision makers? The thing is that what we call alternative facts or fake news, so they are powerful. They are powerful in the way that not necessarily that people believe individual facts, but in the way that they affect the cognitive and mental frames through which people tend to interpret whatever facts they face. So it's the cognitive and mental frames that are really challenged by and affected by what we call the phenomena in the post-truth era. And so what can we do about that? Well, we could sort of start thinking about and be more conscious about the way we think. And actually, that's quite difficult. We're quite human, actually. And I've been doing a lot of what I call bubble hopping in my job, hopping from one bubble to the other and trying to sort of expand my perspective on things. And bubble hopping is not easy, and changing your mind is not easy, no matter how you try to think about the way you think. And an alternative way to approach this is to think that, okay, if we are better aware of different values and emotions, ideologies, and so on that impact people's minds, and take them into consideration in decision making, does that make us more rational? If decision making inherently is irrational, it will increasing knowledge about facts about emotions and values actually, does it make decision making more rational? That's a good question, I think. But what I find very, very important and interesting is really to open up to dialogue, more dialogue with decision makers, and trying to open up and broaden the mental frames through which people tend to interpret the phenomena in our society. And thinking collectively, designing collaborative processes, doing joint sense-making, co-creation of solutions, and so that's the type of phenomena that I'm talking about. And one wonderful tool when you're engaging in efforts to try to broaden your mental frames is dialogue. And dialogue is something that is sometimes a little bit misunderstood. It's not just normal talk about something. Dialogue is a specific way of communicating, recognizing that we human beings are given 2 ears and 1 mouth. That means that we are supposed to listen more, talk less, listen more, and try to learn and understand what other people are saying. So dialogue is a very important tool for broadening mental frames, but unfortunately, both politicians and many scientists are more accustomed to debating and trying to be right than opening up mental frames. So there's a sort of cultural challenge in creating a dialogical culture. And another very important tool for trying to open up mental frames is what is happening in the advancements of advanced data analytics and artificial intelligence, because those are tools that may help us identify connections between different phenomena that our human mind would not be able to identify ourselves. So that is also a very interesting and powerful tool potentially for opening up our minds. So what should governments and policymakers do? First of all, one important thing is that we need to create better synergies when we're developing different science advice mechanisms, different engagement opportunities, and also using the advanced data analytics and artificial intelligence. In today's societies, very often people who develop science advice mechanisms work totally separately from those who develop artificial intelligence, and they work totally separately from those who develop sort of open access and engagement methods. And good decision making in any society requires that these three come together. We need to put together scientific knowledge also with other types of knowledge, artificial intelligence, use the opportunities of advanced data analytics, and also different approaches to engagement and understanding the sensations of the people, no matter what type of policy system we're living in. So that's one thing that the policymakers need to do. And the other thing is the policymakers need to start to learn to contemplate the problem they're dealing with. We tend to have very different types of problems. We have tame and simple problems. We do have messy and more complicated problems, and we do have sort of wicked and extremely complex problems, and each of these different types of problems require very different types of approaches to knowledge use. So we must stop and contemplate the problem that we're dealing with, and then design the knowledge use accordingly. Finally, what should the scientists do? Just like a short repetition, first of all, open up to other types of knowledge and increase cooperation with other types of knowledge. And also focus more strongly on interactive sense-making and framing of the problems, and trying to open up the mental frames through which we interpret the phenomena. So, and my final point to both policymakers and the scientific community is that I would like to challenge the whole concept of evidence-informed policymaking. Because I understand it is better than evidence-based decision policymaking, because policymaking is not simply only evidence-based. But at the same time, when we're talking about evidence-informed, at the same time, we're putting pressure and responsibility on the scientific community, depending on the way we approach it, whether it's packaging information, communicating, building narratives, building institutional settings for science advice, or going into and playing in the political game together with decision makers. It's still the responsibility of the scientific community when you're talking about evidence-informed policymaking. I would really like to put the responsibility on the decision makers and actually emphasize the need to reform the process of decision making and the governance model, so that they can incorporate all the different expectations that are placed on decision-making today, which I presented in the beginning. And one of them is evidence-informed decision-making. So it's really about good decision-making and reforming the governance, the way our societies are governed. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Soji, do you want to give your short pitch?
All right. Here we go. Hello, I'm Shoji Komai from Japan. As Kun introduced me, I'm associate professor at Nara Institute of Science and Technology, working in the neuroscience and behavioral sciences. And then, well, I'm so curious about the, promoting the collaboration between sectors like academia and also industry, and also even in the public. So that's why I've been taking the responsibility for a Science Agora as a chairperson of the promoting committee. Science Agora is one of the largest science forum in Japan. Well, we just finished last week. But more than 5,000 people came together to take the dialogue about human in the new age, which is this year's title. Well, I as a behavior scientist, I'm really wanted to share or point out that the relationship between rationality and also emotionality at the moment. So when we consider the thing really deeply, of course you can think by yourself, but you need to concentrate on some in some isolated space or something, right? But sometimes, of course, you need to collect the fact and knowledge. Even you need to collaborate together with other people to collect the really neat knowledge of facts, right? So that's why you need to, of course, communicate each other. Something. Ooh. No, nothing. Ooh. Not the next one coming out. I don't know. Oh yeah, sorry that. Right. So, but the important thing is that you definitely remember this kind of things. So you suffered more than 500 cognitive bias in a daily life. So basically, every your cognition is skewed in a daily life, right? So maybe you take care of this kind of things. Otherwise, you miss the thing. What we need to tell the others, right? So then how do you make that? How do you make the communication with each other with this kind of cognitive biases? I always say it's the, oh, sorry, this is my family actually. I always say that the familiarity is really important to take this kind of issue, right? So we need to think, we need to communicate, we can communicate each other. Of course, we rely on these guys, of course my wife and also my children, but you don't really rely on them, right? Right? So that's a really important things. I also rely on these friends. This is actually a member of the Global Academy. Of course, I was a member of the Global Academy. Now I'm alum of the Global Academy. So I can communicate with each other, and also I rely on this kind of our personal friends or peers, as mentioned previously. But how about this guy? I don't know who it is, but I took a picture of of this at the, I don't know, maybe in Osaka, but I don't know who it is. But you can't rely on these guys, right? So, well, if you discuss this kind of things, the things, dampers theory, your mind is coming up, right? Dampers theory, it's about the limitation of the number of the your peers or something like that. So it's kind of like maximum limit, sort of 150. So more than 150. You need to think about what kind of people this guys it's really we can't rely on to communicate, to exchange the knowledge and the fact. So that's the important thing. This is also this one, and then. That's why we need to think about the familiarity, right? So if you go farther or you faster, you need to go along. But if you go farther, you definitely need to have another knowledge of the fact. That kind of thing. So if you do this, you need to aware the importance of the emotions. Or just aware. We need to, of course, you usually use the emotions in the daily life, but of course, some of the politicians or some of the commercial or business, you also utilize the emotions, but that what we could do more in the daily life for that kind of democracy or for kind of the things. I would say that you definitely need to aware or realize your cognitive biases, and also you basically use the emotion to exchange value to others. That's pretty much important to reinforce or democracy and stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Soji, for these insights on biases and collective intelligence, and also questioning like what collectivity, in a sense, may mean, and the different kinds of collectivities we use in building our knowledges. Thank you. David.
So 2 great presentations, and I wanted to stick up my hand and ask all sorts of questions in those, but also to come back to some of the fantastic questions we had before. So you guys are really in the zone here of this topic. So I hope the report that we did that came out earlier this year can give some sort of answers and response to some of the things you're saying. And I've got 4 points I wanted to make. So we looked into what the hell is going on at the moment, because this assumption we have that everyone is entirely logical and entirely rational when it comes to political decisions is looking a bit shaky at the moment. And yet it is the model of change which the whole of science works upon. Science assumes that, hey, we did the research, it's right, it's published, it's out there. What else do they want? They just need to go and read it, and when they read it, fiat lux, the scales will drop from their eyes, and the policies will change. And science is still working on this model. It's still working on the idea of we just need another paper, we just need another research grant, we need the politicians and the policymakers to sit down, shut up, and listen to us, and then sooner or later they'll get it, and then the world will change. Well, it's clear that model is not working, and guess who knows it? Well, actually science knows it, because some amazing neuroscientists, psychologists, anthropologists now understand pretty well what drives our political behavior. So what we are pleading for, let's rebuild the model of how knowledge changes policy in society and in government on some real hard facts about human nature. And we worked with some amazing experts, some of them who are here today, to help us understand what the science is saying. And there are a number of conclusions, but there are 4 I wanted to present. So, first important one is that science often neglects that it is values and identities, and these are complex related concepts, which is driving our political behavior. These are the things that really drive us as citizens, but also as politicians, and indeed probably as civil servants, our worldviews and our values. And that's not wrong. And it's not wrong for a fundamental reason. Science can only tell you what is, can tell you about reality, about how the world should be. That is a purely philosophical, religious, normative, values-based question. Only the values can decide where you as a society should go and where is you as an individual want to go. Science cannot answer that question. And so therefore it's entirely right and proper that our values and identity should determine the political direction. And the interesting thing when you think about values and identities is we tend to sort ourselves into groups of people with the same values as us. And we talk about our values and we have a lot in common. And therefore it leads us to this sense that this is how everyone works. And these are the values that everyone in society wants. But in fact there are often different values, preferences in society. And we have to work extra hard to understand people with different preferences to ours, because in democracy they are not by definition wrong. They all need to be understood and taken into account. So what we're saying is that both policymakers but also scientists need to work much harder to understand different values, preferences in societies. And what we discovered is we're very bad at this. We're really bad at this. Scientists still sometimes labor under the illusion that science itself is a value-free exercise. No. Science produces results that can be reproduced, and it produces results that can be falsified, and that's great. But still, the people producing the science have values, and this does have a relationship with what comes out at the end. You might think that policymakers would recognize that a lot of their job is actually sorting through the different values, preferences, and making those necessary trade-offs. But what we found is that this job is not very well done. We kind of lack the tools to talk about values very well. So in fact, a lot of the science is having to do a lot of the heavy lifting around values. So instead of having a clear discussion of, do we care more about the people, planet, health, growth, jobs, too often this discussion about the values gets sucked back into a discussion about the science, and the science is a proxy for these things. So we have a rather difficult and entangled relationship between the facts and the values, and we think both the science and the policy would be better if we could somehow have clearer discussions of the values and separate them from what the science is saying. And we're working on this to try and make it easier. Second point, these are some nice images from a recent G20. The top left one is perhaps the most famous one. But at the same time, the private offices of all the heads of state and government were taking photos as well. And it's just kind of get across a simple point about framing, which Ava picked up very nicely, that there is never a neutral way to present the science. You always have to pick a perspective. So this idea that science can always be objective and you can give the view from nowhere is nonsense. You have to pick a perspective. And picking a perspective, all these perspectives are true, they're all accurate, no problem with that, but they're different. So we need to get around this idea that the facts simply speak for themselves. They always need to be framed. And also it's inherent in how we communicate that metaphors and narratives are part of how we communicate. And sometimes the view from scientists is, well, that would pollute the independence of the science if we frame it in a particular way or use metaphors or narratives. And our message is there is no escape from using framing, metaphors and narratives. So instead science should embrace it, because that is how the lessons of the science will be heard and understood. We do need to work out how to do this much more ethically and much more transparency, so that when you are presenting one work in a particular way and framing it in a particular way, you're upfront and saying, well, this is just one way to frame it. You could also frame it this way. And if you're presenting the same work in different perspectives, these should obviously not be contradictory. They should be, and they should be available for other people to look at the different ways of looking at this knowledge. So lots of people have touched on this question. This is an image from one of the referendums in Ireland. And behind this referendum, there was an interesting process of engagement and dialogue with citizens, which we think is going to be incredibly important. And this comes from a crucial issue that we're sort of tiptoeing around today, but I don't think we've really nailed it. And the crucial thing is that both science and democracy depend utterly on trust. As a scientist, you basically know nothing outside a very, very tiny area. Instead, what you know, or you think you know, is what you take on trust from Shoji's friends in the GYA, or you trust it because it's been coming out of a professor from a respected university or in a journal. So I think we've lost sight of the fact that how much of what we think we know and what is at the heart of science is all about trust. And hey presto, democracy is all about trust. It's, do you trust your representatives to reflect your values, preferences? And so this question of what's going on in this crisis of trust, we have a crisis of trust in our democracy and we have a crisis of trust in our knowledge. And these are not separate crises, Stefan. This is the same crisis. And there's an argument to say that this crisis in our knowledge and what we trust in our knowledge is actually the underpinning one. Because if we can't agree on what the hell is going on, there is no stable ground upon which to solve these problems. So this is why the crisis of trust in science and expertise is such a fundamental one. So what the hell do we do about that? Well, look at the science. And what does the science say about trust? It tells you that there are three things that underpin trust. And excellence, winning a Nobel Prize and being published in Science and Nature, is only one of those three things. It's not enough just to be good as a scientist if you want to be trusted. In the world of science it is, by the way. And that's part of the problem, is that you can get to the top in science just by doing good work. That's enough. But how science rolls, what works in the science, works in almost no other area of human life. So all the lessons that scientists infer about how to get to the top in science don't work outside science, and they above all don't work in policy. The other two things that are essential, firstly, is are you perceived as honest? Are you perceived as honest? How do you do that? You do that by opening up your processes and being transparent about your interests and values, and admitting that you are not value-free. You come with a particular background, with a set of values, preferences, which have guided the choices of things you want to research, and which data makes the final cut and which doesn't. So scientists need to open up to engaging with citizens about what they're doing, and policymakers do as well. And the earlier in the process, the better. And the third thing that's incredibly important is about whether you are seen as trustworthy is, do you have a community of interests and values with this person? Do you share something? If the person looks and sounds like someone who has a completely different set of values and interests than you will not trust them. And this is a bit of a problem for science, because if you're an ordinary person, science looks a bit like the elite that you have all the other problems with. So until we start making it look as though academia doesn't look like all the clever people in some sort of conspiracy against the ordinary people, we're going to have a problem. Last thing. So sometimes when I talk about this subject, I get the sense that scientists think, well, of course policy should be informed by evidence. You know, what else have you got? That's just kind of logical, isn't it? But I think as has become clear in our discussion about, you know, what is democracy and how they fit together, we have to recognize that the idea that government decisions should be informed by science and evidence is not a given. It's not axiomatic. This is a value. And what we're saying is that this value, it's all part of a piece with what we call liberal democracy, the idea that democracy, rule of law, and human rights. Also that government should be obliged to motivate their decisions based on science, which is the best account of reality. And therefore, this thing ain't going to happen on its own. If you believe it's important that our government should be based on reason and evidence and science, you have to champion that. You have to fight for it. You have to argue for it. And you have to argue when it comes to budgets and appointments and institutions and agencies and government processes and that whole thing. Because unless you campaign for it, it won't happen just what you have.
Thank you, David, also for highlighting trust as a central part of this discussion and unpacking trust a little bit, because trust, of course, is not a black box, but as you say, it has different elements, and there's also institutions that actually are there to build trust. That's crucial. So now it's Connie's time to give the final pitch on the theme.
Yes, good afternoon, I think now it is. I will also start by saying that I am not a historian or a philosopher, and in fact I'm even a recovering scientist, so I now identify as a science and policy facilitator. And I will only give the perspective of one African woman, really. So I cannot speak for everyone. I want to just, it's interesting that many people were talking about democracy. And me too, in the title of this talk, I was really thinking, what is this democracy? And I want to lay the foundation about how we in Africa, or in Uganda, shall I say, think about democracy. We just think democracy is to have an election every 5 years and elect someone. And when you see Kenya and Tanzania here, who are our neighbors, when 3 or 4 presidents are alive, we think we are doing very well. Except in some countries, we might think the democracy thing doesn't work very well for us. So then if we had put in the constitution that we want 2 terms, we can always change it to no term limits when we are on the 2nd term. And then when we become over the age that you can be voted for, we can remove the age limits as well. And then you will have this situation that we have in Uganda, where we've had the same president for 36 years. And this is still a democracy because it's voted in every time. And just to go beyond our democracy in East Africa, someone has even done a study across Africa to say the dark areas are places where people feel that there's too much democracy, apparently. The supply is higher than demand. We are too democratic here, we should tone it down. And the places where it's yellow, they feel they could do with more democracy, you know. But I must say, in Africa, I don't think we really have this deep philosophical, historical, blah, 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 thinking about democracy. Democracy, we just have to appear to be democratic, which is vote someone into office every 5 years, as it says in the Constitution. I thought I should lay that foundation. Now to the question about how science reinforces democracy through a more realistic picture of human nature. I showed you, my slides are not showing the way I expect them, but okay, it's okay, it's okay. Yes, I just want to say that maybe a little bit about how I perceive our governments to make decisions in our democracy. And one of the ways is through what we call best practices, which I suppose is a kind of evidence. It's, so you'll see a lot of these kind of things informing policy in our countries. But we also have, of course, all these global goals and this and the other. And this is how we decide, okay, we're going to have education for all, or we're going to vaccinate everybody because we have to tick the boxes in these international agreements that we have signed. But I feel that sometimes when we are led by this kind of best practices, you know, you'll have the whole parliament flown to Sweden to see how the education how the education system works, or they'll fly to Botswana to see how things work there, and then just import it. The problem, of course, is that sometimes it doesn't work in the context. And as scientists in the country, we are also not that well versed with reality. The questions that we ask, we base on journal articles that are in Nature and Science and whatever, which are also about other contexts. So in general, then we're probably going to ask the wrong questions. And maybe just to come back to the issue of democracy, perhaps if we were to think that everyone gets their fair share of the public good, so that they can benefit from these decisions that politicians make based on these best practices or based on following global agreements, the question is, coming to what Esh said earlier, at the very least, if these decisions are being made, is the public receiving good health care, good education? I think we would be satisfied with that as a population. The only problem is when we take these ready-made solutions and bring them into our context, we have issues like the one that I'm just going to show, a short video. Is anyone from Ghana in the room? No one? The accent is a bit difficult to follow, but just try.
I take a seat at Giradogo Presby School in the Pandai district of the Northern Region. My aim is to find out how students in JHS2 were coping with information communication technology lessons without computers. Today's lesson is how to create a folder.
To create a folder, before you can able to create a folder,
pardon the spelling error and concentrate on what the teacher has to say about how to create a folder.
Create a folder. Before you can able to create a folder, when you on your boot on your computer, we have some place you click. You click, and then you see the place folder. And when you click, the folder will, the empty folder will appear. And then you open it and put all your documents inside.
I am confused about what the teacher is saying, so I intervened.
Do you know what a folder is? Please no. Who knows what a folder is?
Folder is a symbol where you keep or kept your what? Documents inside for the future use.
What did your teacher say?
He said that a folder is where you keep your documents for future use.
Folder is a kind of storage device which where the documents are kept.
A folder is a form of distance. It's a form of picture when you keep your distance, your things inside. Example like information or documents. There.
Kind of a computer where file or data input.
What is happening here is sad, perhaps tragic. This teacher has been employed under the National Youth Employment Program. He is expected to impart knowledge to the children. Unfortunately, the children don't understand the lessons, but the teacher insists they are doing very well.
Yes, they understand.
Did they tell you they understand? Does it show that they understand?
Yeah, the reason why I'm sure that they understand is that when I contest them class tests or class exercise, they'll perform.
The point I'm trying to make as an educator is policymakers will wake up one morning and say we are going to have ICT education across the country. But they will not consider first and foremost that you have to have computers in these classes, or that you have to train the teachers, or that perhaps you cannot have the same curriculum all across the country at once. And thinking about the benefits to generations of children who have gone through these policy changes that are introduced without a proper understanding of reality, I don't think I don't think evidence is working for us when you talk about best practices or global agreements on what we should do. And so I would say that these young people are not getting the benefits of education. And the question for me then is back to how can science reinforce democracy, democracy being decision-making that creates the best life for most of all of the inhabitants. And the first thing that I would say is, as scientists in our own countries, we really should try and supply our decision makers with accurate information about our reality. Now, not only though should we seek this reality with reference to other science or other scientists, we should collect this reality with other knowledge sources. So many scientists will sit, as I did when I was doing my PhD, in our own offices and think about an interesting question and think, this is the issue this is what's happening in the education system. I'll do a 4-year PhD study on it. Whereas we could do much better, ask much better questions if we were more aware of a fuller picture of reality. And so that's the main question that I would like to say, that before we even think about how should we think about how humans act politically, we as scientists have to, in contexts like mine, have to take the care to really build a picture of our own reality so that our decision makers can make decisions with a better understanding of the context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Connie, for showing also the contextuality of rational decisions, and that they always need to be based in local issues. And that also resonates very well, I think, with Professor Arimoto's point about also how the democracy and science was introduced in Japan in a very different context and all the problems that results from that. So back to the public for a bit. After all this information, what do you have now as a response to our speakers? Yeah, you want to?
I just want to say thank you for bringing up education, and it's a shame that it came up at the very end, because I think this is a key element to solving a lot of the problems and that are being addressed, because an informed society can maybe be trusted with democracy and can make informed decisions, and the key to that information is how we educate young people and even adults and everybody, and how well the population can digest and understand scientific information, evidence, but also politics and political systems and their own self-interests. So,
can I just come in on that?
Yeah, there's one very important thing you missed out there, is education in understanding how we think, because what the science says is simply having more clever people who have greater science knowledge doesn't mean that they become less prone to biases and motivated reasoning. In fact, the cleverer you get, that means you are just more clever at inventing reasons why that study wasn't right. So unless part of that education is an education in critical thinking and recognizing the limits to our ability to think as individuals, then simply giving people science PhDs will not correct the problems we're seeing at the moment.
I was thinking about it earlier during the plenary of what if we replaced the word science with art, and would we put the same burden on artists? And I'm not trying to create a false equivalence here by just putting in another thing and saying we can't talk about this. I'm saying a lot of the personal responsibility, the debate about whose personal responsibility is it to what happens with the science. Many scientists, myself included, see themselves as creatives who are thinking, and that's our endeavors in life. How do we get more specific about what we mean when we're talking about these things in implementation? Some scientists are just thinking and would like that space to think, and so it's a big discussion that seems to be all over here, is who is throwing the burden on who in terms of ethical implementation. I understand ethical thinking and responsibility, but then how does that get enacted in policy? And whose role is it? I'm still very not clear on that from what everyone's perspectives are.
A comment to David. I very much enjoyed your exposition of where the real challenges are in understanding and making bridges in dialogue, etc. My challenge to you would be, it's not only values that we need to understand. I challenge that we do not understand trust itself. If we worked on trust, values follow in a second order of hierarchy. That is the most fundamental quality of human whenever we deal with any aspect of life, from getting out of bed to stepping out in the street to dialogue with other fellows.
Great comment, thank you. I think there were more hands going up. Sure.
Thank you. Bill Gillett again from ESAC. I'd like to come back to this question about the education and what the education actually means, because I'm a little bit lost now. When we first had this crazy Brexit result, we all said it's the stupid people, the uneducated people that are voting to get out of Europe. The problem is our education system. It's wrong. We've got stupid people here. And now we begin to reflect a bit more, and we find that there's still a lot of people who've had quite a good education who are voting with some other reason that my group of people don't understand. And I'm wondering whether this idea that democracy only works if you're educated enough is a valid one, or do we trust as much whether we're educated or not educated? If it is an education-related issue, we've got a problem, because there's a whole generation of new people that are going to have to be educated before we can trust democracy again. What is the relationship between democracy working and education?
Great, thank you so much. Before we end this session, I would like to take one more comment from the public. So, yes.
Thank you. I come from a country which has more in common with Connie's version of democracy. While I understand, and to borrow your term, I'm a recovering political analyst / lobbyist turned into and want to become a science communicator. So it's different paths, but the one thing that I would like to share, and I'd also ask a question from the panel, is that while the version of democracy, the way that we see it framed in Europe or in North America, is it has a different variant in how it's implemented in large parts of Africa and large parts of Asia. However, I still feel that democracy does exist in a sense that it's not just about voting, it's also about the push and pull. So the prime example here would be the video that you showed of a failure of an IT policy being implemented in a country. For me, that's a democratic expression of failure, which would, I'm pretty sure in Ghana, came up, was covered, and the government or governments or the relevant ministry is trying to fix it in some way, I'm hoping, and that the conversation will go on from there. So the criticism in itself is rooted in democracy somewhere along the line. The question I have from the panel or whoever would want to answer it is, when we say the science or scientists or the community itself needs to be value driven or needs to develop trust with society, are we talking in individual terms, or is this a collective form of, because it's not easy, especially from I come from Pakistan. It's not easy that for scientists to be heard at the same level as maybe climate change advocates in the US or climate change deniers in the US. So we could have a collective voice, which we're trying to do now, or we could individually, keep on doing what we're doing, and eventually get somewhere by the year 2100.
Thank you very much for that final comment and question. And I'm very conscious that we actually won't have time to answer your question and the many questions that have been posed. It's also not just a time issue, it's also because we don't have the answers to all of these questions, obviously. But I think it's very important that these questions have been posed and that we have had a very interesting interaction between our speakers and the public. And so to conclude this session, I would like to ask our speakers to thank our fantastic public. Right. Thank you so much, everyone.